All right, what's up, everybody? I'm here for my second Spaces on X, and I'm hoping to have an open discussion. I know a lot of my followers are fellow professionals, mobility pros, so my idea is to kick off the discussion with what I see my work, and then I'd like people to interject and talk. And if there's any other mobility pros in here that deal with these issues, either directly or tangentially, would love for you to join the conversation and hear what you have to say and learn from you as well. So I guess I will let, I guess I'll give just a couple minutes, just maybe 1 minute, 2 minutes, 2 minutes max. And then I'm just going to start talking, and I'll let anybody who wants to grab the mic and come up as a speaker. So that's it. All right, we got Javier here. What's up, Javier? Javier, the Bitcoin media guru from Venezuela and El Salvador. We got John Richardson here, citizenship, American citizenship and renunciation attorney, tour de force. And hopefully we're going to have some other people here as well. And then we'll get started here. And if anybody wants to, if anybody wants us to talk about a particular aspect of citizenship by descent for Americans, just feel free to either come up and say so, or you can just write it in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the comments. I'm not going to go too specific on particular programs because different people are going to qualify potentially for different things. I kind of want to talk about common issues that I see in people trying to research their own eligibility and obtain documents to qualify for one or more European citizenships by descent. So we're not going to go too specific on different programs, but we'll go into kind of common advice for people, specifically Americans, who think they may qualify or are interested in, figuring out what are the next steps if they might qualify. So. All right, so I'm going to start. Like I said, reminder, anybody wants to be a speaker, would love for you to come up. Please just raise your hand, send a speaking invite, and I will accept it for you to come up. So my name is Parviz Malakouti Fitzgerald. I'm, of course, a citizenship and mobility attorney. Part of my work is inbound U.S. immigration, but part of my work is also outbound, what I consider outbound, and that I include in that Americans pursuing second citizenship by descent or otherwise, irrespective of whether the American actually wants to pick up and move. I still consider that outbound. We see a huge increase in people that are looking for Plan B. Plan B is a common phrase that gets bandied about. And Plan B for Americans, of course, can mean citizenship elsewhere, residency elsewhere, potentially, even a visa elsewhere. Of course, the gold standard for access to another country and access to live in a country is citizenship. Fortunately, because of the history of immigration to the United States, Americans as a group qualify for a lot of citizenships by descent. So there's different numbers that I've seen bandied about. I don't know what percentage of Americans qualify. I've seen written as high as 40% qualify for European citizenship by descent. I think that might be a little bit high, but I certainly think that the number could be around 25% or possibly even more. So there's a few countries in Europe that have pretty liberal citizenship by descent programs, and they also sent a lot of immigrants to the United States, which are the ancestors of many of us. So these are Italy, Poland, Hungary, Czechia, Slovakia, and Ireland, of course. And so naturally, there's a lot of people here in the United States that are boomeranging back and trying to qualify for citizenship by descent. So a couple things. First of all, I'm going to put in the comment section a link to an article that I wrote on Family Tree magazine a couple years ago, which is going to go over some of the concepts I'm going to talk about today. It's called How to Become a Dual Citizen Using Genealogy. So first of all, for citizenship by descent, we're talking about qualifying for citizenship, whether it be by naturalization or acquisition of citizenship, which is not naturalization. I'll go into the difference between the two in a moment, based off of your ancestry. So based off of the citizenship of one of your ancestors, sometimes even the ethnicity of an ancestor actually can lead to either a citizenship eligibility or what I call a semi-citizenship eligibility. I'll go over what a semi-citizenship is as well a little bit later on. So generally, the first step is knowing your ancestry. All right, basically finding out whether when and where your ancestors were born, what countries they were citizens of. Right, and in our live from 2 days ago, Patrick was here, and Patrick made a great point, which I completely agreed with, which is that many people think or they are told flippantly that if you have an ancestor that was from a particular country that you necessarily qualify. Oh, your great grandfather was from Italy. Oh, you qualify for Italian citizenship by descent. And it's not so simple. It can be more complicated than that because you have to sometimes analyze the citizenship status of everybody in the chain of lineage between you and that potentially qualifying ancestor. So here's what I think as a practical matter people should do if they think they may qualify for citizenship by descent. And the first thing is basically to research their ancestry. And specifically, you're looking for a few things. Okay. So, first of all, low hanging fruit, the easiest way generally for most people is to start on ancestry.com or familysearch.org. Okay. You can get a lot of documents related to your ancestors, especially if they lived in the United States, worked in the United States, and you can go back sometimes several generations. Now, you typically can't use the documents that you receive from Family Search or Ancestry. There's typically downloadable PDFs in order to apply, but they're very helpful nevertheless because you can mine those documents for information and use them to actually request the certified copies, and I'll go over that. So when you're looking for documentation regarding your ancestors, there's a few things obviously that are relevant. Okay, for sure relevant. Where were they born? Okay, so if you think you have an ancestor, a grandparent, or a great grandparent that was born in a European country, you want to know not just what is the modern day country, but what's the actual city that they were born in. Why? Because obviously, because of shifting borders, that city, although it's part of country X today, let's say, Ukraine, it may have been part of Slovakia or Czechoslovakia previously. So you want to find out where and when they were born. So you're looking for birth certificates or potentially baptismal certificates. You also want to know the marriage status of your qualifying ancestor, potentially qualifying ancestor, as well as everybody that's in the chain in between. There's a few reasons that you need to know the dates of marriage, right? One is that because if you're trying to prove basically a chain of lineage and you're going through a female ancestor, oftentimes they change their names, of course. So you need to know, you need to find a document that actually identifies the grandmother or great grandmother as being the same person that they were before the marriage. The other big reason is that previously, so in the early part, up until the early part of the 20th century, so up until the 1920s or so, sometimes even later for certain countries, the citizenship status of a married female changed based off of her marriage, changed automatically by operation of law. So that's an important fact to know if you might be qualifying through a female ancestor. She may have lost the citizenship by virtue of marrying somebody else, and that loss of citizenship could potentially sever your own eligibility. So you want dates of marriage. For that, obviously, you want marriage certificates. So you're looking for birth certificates, marriage certificates. You're also looking for dates of immigration, right? So ostensibly, if you're here in the United States and you had an ancestor that was from a European country, at some point they or somebody, after them came over to the United States. You want to find out the dates of immigration. A couple reasons. First of all, another common condition of loss for citizenship in many European countries was continuous absence from the country. So you need to find out when they came over to find out whether they potentially lost their citizenship or if they kept it. Hand in hand with that, you want to find dates of naturalization. And by the way, I'm going to go over best practices for where to start to get these documents, but I just want to kind of go over the general overlay. So you want to look for potential naturalizations in the United States. Why naturalization? Because again, naturalization for many European countries was an act that severed the citizenship. That basically resulted in a person's loss of citizenship. So, as far as low hanging fruit is concerned, like I said, I recommend for all of these, so birth certificates, marriage certificates, dates of immigration, naturalization petitions, you start in familysearch.org or ancestry.com. For the dates of immigration, if they came to the United States in the earlier part of the 20th century, you're typically looking for a ship manifest record and or a certificate of arrival. So those show up on Ancestry or Family Search. And then when it comes time for you to actually request a certified copy, typically you're requesting from the National Records Archive. And I have a guide on my website, Malakouti Law, that shows step-by-step how to request a ship manifest record or certificate of arrival for an ancestor from that time period. For birth records in the United States, you can go directly to the county clerks of the place, the county that you think that they were born in, or typically you can actually use vitalcheck.com. Vitalcheck.com is basically a company that's been contracted by many states in order to handle online requests. So you can request the birth records through VitalCheck. Oftentimes you can get marriage certificates through VitalCheck as well. And then for naturalization petitions, for older ones, you can also get those from the National Records Archive as well. So the bottom line is you're looking for the documentation. And citizenship by descent applications for Americans are a little bit different, in my opinion, than a lot of other types of citizenship or even residency applications, because I would argue, and if there's somebody on here, Patrick, maybe you can chime in as well. Tell me if you agree with this or not. I would argue that with citizenship by descent applications, the bulk of the work, the heavy lifting, is done before you actually lodge the application. So the bulk of the work and the difficulty is in researching eligibility and then accumulating and preparing the official or certified documents. Once those steps are done, the third step, of course, is to apply. Obviously, it's important to apply properly and respond accordingly to any additional requests for information. But in a properly prepared application, I would say 75%, maybe 60 to 75% of the heavy lifting is done after that step two, where you've gotten the certified documents and you've gotten them apostilled, even before you lodge the application. And I'm basing this just based off of my own experience in terms of the workload, how much work, how much difficulty goes in. When the application has been prepared properly, it's typically, it might be a long process, but it's typically a smooth process after lodging the application. So in this way, citizenship by descent is kind of different. It's front loaded as far as the work and the difficulty. And one misconception that I see hand in hand with this is that people kind of are flippant about the eligibility criteria. That's one of the two most important parts, in my opinion, is actually properly being screened for eligibility. The second most important part that I would, according to me, or according to my experience, would be basically finding, and obtaining those certified documents. We got Patrick coming in here asking to speak, so I'm going to enable your microphone here. Bear with me, folks. I'm still making my way around the spaces. Okay. Patrick, you're a speaker. Feel free to jump in at any moment that you want here. Or do you want to jump in now?
Hey everyone, I thought I'd chime in here. Let me know if you can hear me.
We can hear you. Go ahead, Patrick.
Awesome. Yeah, I was gonna dovetail on the point you made about having a front-loaded application or research process, and I would argue that that's pretty spot on. I think, um, if you're thinking of time as gosh, this is gonna get real philosophical real fast. But basically, it is very easy to spin your wheels on the research side. So it's not that it takes longer, it does, but it also the propensity for it to just blow up the shot clock is pretty large. Um, and then the other piece to it is that, depending on the citizenship by descent, you can either the routes typically are either through a consular process or through a legal process. And for most of the time, for most citizenship by descent, you can get a consular appointment even if it's a year out, particularly with Italy. You can do that and then collect your documents. However, if you have to go through a legal route, which is increasingly the case, particularly for Italy, You cannot file that legal. You cannot file your case until you have all of the documents assembled, authenticated, and have a local on the ground attorney with an executed POA. So power of attorney. Sorry, try not to speak in acronyms. So there is a strategy to it, and either way takes a lot of time. It's a huge project. There's a huge project management aspect to it, but researching on the front end is the bulk of the work, and I would argue it's a little bit more of the academic fun and learning aspects to it, as opposed to just the project management aspect, which is more on the later end of the whole timeline.
Great. Yes. Yeah, I agree with everything that you said there. Absolutely. So continuing on, couple I wanted to go over a couple misconceptions, common misconceptions. Some of these is going to be old hat or so simple for some of you, but maybe we have some people that are just learning about citizenship by descent. So one misconception, common among older people, I don't really see this often with people that are under 40 or 50. Dual citizenship in the US is illegal or disfavored. No, that's not the case. That's old information. Dual citizenship is totally fine. Becoming citizens by descent in a European country is not, it's not something that jeopardizes in any way, shape, or form your US citizenship. Another misconception, super common misconception, it's almost baked into people's thinking. Why would I want to get citizenship there? I'm not even going to live there. Or I don't want to live there. You don't have to live where you have citizenship, right? And I for some reason, I guess it's an older notion of being resident in one place and being citizen in one place. People mix this up all the time. You don't have to live in the vast majority of the cases. You don't have to live in the new country that you obtain citizenship by descent in. A lot of people are doing it, like I said, just for Plan B, or increasingly, what I'm seeing is a profile of the white collar professional that works remotely, and they want to split time. Maybe they want to start spending a month per year in the country, 2 months, maybe towards an eye with an eye towards retiring in the country. So number two, you don't have to live in a new country. Third misconception that I see here is that your last foreign-born ancestor is always the last foreign citizen. Very, very common misconception that I see. And that's understandable, right? Because people are not that familiar. A lot of people are not that familiar with automatic acquisition of citizenship abroad. So oftentimes what happens is that we have a scenario where somebody's, let's call it their great grandparent, great grandfather, was born abroad. The person goes into, or, that's researching on their own or thinking about it on their own. They think, okay, well, that's the last, relative that I had that was an Italian citizen, or the last relative I had that was a Hungarian citizen, because their child, their son, my grandfather, was born in the United States. That's not always the case. It's absolutely not always the case. Automatic acquisition of citizenship happens by operation of law. No forms needed from a legal perspective, right? Really important to know. So sometimes the last ancestor that a person has in their lineage is not the last person. The last ancestor they have that was a citizen of that country oftentimes is not the last ancestor that was born in that country. Okay, so important to distinguish the two concepts. Another misconception that I see is that if an ancestor was born in a city or town that's in modern day country X, then that necessarily means that that person was a citizen of modern day country X. And this has to do, of course, with the situation in which a person was born in a city that was part of a different country back then, and that territory is part of a new country today. Okay, so that situation, the citizenship of that potentially qualifying ancestor that you might have has to be evaluated individually, right? And then, of course, there's plenty of times where that ancestor was born in that city, and maybe they were not a citizen ever of either of those countries, either the modern day country or the country that claimed that city at the time, right? So that's these are probably these last three are probably the three most common misconceptions that I see regularly for people who are considering citizenship by descent. It's not a problem. These misconceptions are not a problem if somebody finds their way to a competent professional, because the professional will cut through that quickly. But it's a problem when people allow these misconceptions to cut off their line of inquiry and they don't take that next step forward because they just decide in their own mind, oh no, there's no way I qualify, or I probably don't qualify because of X misconception, and they don't take the step forward, and that's really a shame, obviously, because in that occasion a person's depriving themselves, their family, and their children of potentially a really impactful benefit, just because they were confused about a point, right? So that's one. Those are three misconceptions. Now, documents. Let's get into some documents, and I'm sure Patrick will have plenty to add or say about this as well. Couple common issues that I see with documents, right? So first of all, you have to prove in the vast majority of these processes, you have to prove your eligibility through documentation, and typically through certified or original records. What I mean is that typically you can't just print off a PDF copy from familysearch.org of your ancestor's birth certificate and use that. No, you usually have to go and track down either the original, the tattered one, the tattered document from 100, 120 years ago, or a certified copy. So a newly generated certified copy from the entity that's competent, right, to issue the birth certificate for the person. Um, that's a problem oftentimes. Okay, so two problems that rise related to that. One is that a person cannot ever find evidence of something. They can't ever find either certified or non-certified copy of their great grandparents' birth certificate. Or second issue that comes up is they can find the unofficial copy on familysearch.org or ancestry.com, or maybe a family member has a copy of PDF. But when it comes time to actually get the certified copy, they can't get it. The courthouse says they don't have it, or the archive says they don't have it. You just can't find the certified copy. Those are two common issues that I see come up, and they can be they can be real problems, and for some programs they can even be deal breakers, right? In that case, if you really have exhausted all avenues to try to find these documents, then you have to turn towards trying to use substitute documentation to make the case, to prove the point that so and so was born here, on this date, et cetera, or those types of things. Patrick, anything you want to say about document issues and finding documents?
Yeah, I will add a couple things. The first one being that when you think of a birth certificate, it carries legal weight, right? You show up with a birth certificate, you know, no big secret. Mine is from California. I'm a Californian originally. Uh, if I take that into any office in or government entity in the United States, it proves my identity, right? It kind of presupposes one's um uh you needed to get a passport, for example, right? Think of the historical naturalization records of your ancestors in the same way. So if you printed off a copy of your birth certificate, like a Xerox copy, I'm gonna date myself as a millennial here. That's going to be totally worthless, right? From a legal perspective, it has information, but it's not legally enforceable. Same with those naturalization documents of your ancestors, and they can go back as in some cases they can go back to I recently had a client where we found his ancestors' naturalization documents at a local courthouse from the 1850s, and it's like written pre-typewriter. That is still issued by the archives, carries the same legal weight as would a vital record. And so I think that is an important paradigm to see these documents through. And the other is that most countries have their working civic records. Say, in most states it would be like their vital document or their county clerk, or it gets wrapped up at the state level. And then if they go beyond a certain date, then they usually are transferred to the archives. And so in some cases, for states, there are state archives, and then for federal records, there's a federal archives. And um, a lot of times, knowing where to look is half the battle. Um, and I'll add my little piece here, particularly for Italian and German citizenship by descent. Even if you can get your ancestors' naturalizations from the National Archives, from NARA, who still has an astonishingly puny budget and still delivers documents reasonably well, that is not a good enough. You actually have to go to USCIS's archives, which they operate, in a couple different fashions, and that can take a really long time. And the way you authenticate those documents isn't added layer on top of it, which I'll leave for future discussion. But I think knowing where to go to find the documents is truly half the battle. And I can share some more stories later if you want some absurd examples of how documents are stored and where.
Yeah, great point, Patrick. And yeah, I will ask you for some of those war stories in a bit, actually. You said something, you said knowing where to look is half the battle. Totally agree. And, I actually, I actually tweeted something that I called Malakouti's Law, right? Which I defined as if a document is supposed to be with a given government office slash archive slash clerk, no matter how much they insist they don't have it, 9 times out of 10, they do actually have it, right? Now, this is from my experience. Now, obviously, this only applies if the document is actually supposed to be with that government office. But I've had it's not just 1 time or 2 times or 3 times or 4 times. I've had now many times where I've had really rigorous back and forth with this office, escalating whether it be an archive or a clerk or whatever about the presence of the document in their possession. And I've learned that oftentimes they have it. Okay, even if there's an element of bureaucratic pushing people, sending them to the get lost department is what I call it. So obviously, to have the confidence and be willing to invest the energy to really push back with an office, obviously you got to be fairly confident that that is the office that should have the document. But the reason I'm explaining this is, you kind of have to take, in my opinion, a a an office, an archive that's supposed to have a document saying they don't have it with a grain of salt. I don't really ever take the first denial. If I know that it's supposed to be there, I don't really take the first denial seriously. I push back and make them check again. So that's a really important issue as well. And some of this is not really legal work. Some of this is just knowing how to deal with bureaucrats and bureaucracies, knowing how to navigate personalities, deal with difficult people. I call it carrot and stick, right? Carrot, using the honey, being nice; stick, kind of getting a little bit, I don't want to say mean, but persistent when you have to. And sometimes you got to do that actually to get the documents. It's the unfortunate truth. So yeah, so that's the documentation. Another thing is you're usually not finished with preparing the document after you actually get a certified document. We have this other thing called an apostille, which in my experience, most Americans don't know what an apostille is. It's not something that's common in parlance of Americans. And an apostille is a higher level, it's an additional level of certification of a document that's signed by a public official in order for it to be used in a foreign country, right? So when you get a certified document and you want to use it for citizenship by descent process in, Slovakia or, Italy or most of these other countries, most European countries, not all, but most, you have to take that document and then send it to the competent authority in order to get apostilled. The competent authority for apostilling a document that's issued by a state agency is usually the Secretary of State of that agency. Okay, so as a practical matter, to request an apostille, you get the certified document. You usually have a cover sheet to request the apostille. You pay a filing fee, and then a return address envelope, and then you send it off to the Secretary of State. And depending on their workload, you get it back in a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months or longer. For documents that were issued and signed by officials at federal agencies, the competent authority to apostille them is the U.S. Office of Authentications, which is located in Washington, D.C. So if you're an American applying for a European Union, citizenship by descent in a European country, the vast majority of them require an FBI background check. That's an identity history summary. And I'll talk a little bit about issues related to that. That's issued by the FBI CJIS, and you have to apostille that with the U.S. Office of Authentications. Naturalization, U.S. naturalization petitions, typically apostilled with Office of Authentications, as well as ship manifest records, as well as certificates of non-existence of naturalization records, other documents that are issued by USCIS. So the heuristic is if the document's issued by a state agency, you usually apostille it with the Secretary of State of that state. If the document's issued by a federal agency, typically you apostille it at the federal level with the U.S. Office of Authentications. So that's the second step for document preparation. And then typically the third step is you have to get translated. You have to get the document translated as well into the language that you are going to submit the language of the country that you're submitting the application to, right? So you see how these processes start to stack up on one another. Many of them you can't do concurrently. You got to go one step at a time, and you have bottlenecks, unfortunately, and sometimes delays in how long these things take. There was a period of time it was the fall of 2021 where the backlog for the U.S. Office of Authentications was over 14 weeks in order to apostille a document. That's a big problem, especially considering that some countries were requiring FBI background checks that were less than 3 months old in order to not be stale. Well, obviously 14 weeks is longer than 3 months, and that doesn't even include the time it took the person to get the FBI background check, to send it, to get it back, then get it translated, then go to their appointment. So these are, Patrick said it, there's a big project management aspect to the preparation of these citizenship by descent applications. And obviously I'm generalizing here. Some are simpler than others. And of course, the application is typically simpler the fewer generations you have to trace in order to get to the qualifying ancestor. So qualifying through your father is simpler than qualifying generally through your grandfather. And calling through your grandfather is typically simpler than qualifying through your great-grandfather, and so on and so on. So anybody want to come up here and chime in? We got Patience is here. We got Mr. John Richardson. We got Slesko. Anybody want to chime in and give their experience or ask a question? Okay, that's fine. I'll continue on here. Okay, so FBI background checks. I tweet a lot about FBI background checks, right? Because I find them to be a really central document for Americans that are applying for citizenship, residency, or sometimes a visa elsewhere. The FBI background check, and by that I'm referring specifically to the identity history summary. It's a document that you can request for yourself. If you have no criminal record, it's 2 pages long. If you have a criminal record, it could be 3 pages all the way up until 8, 9. I think the longest one I saw was 10 pages long, right? It's important. It's important to know a few things about the FBI background check. First of all, very common to have mistakes on the FBI background check. So it could be a mistake related to your criminal record if you have a criminal record. But I have seen and now corrected mistakes, a mistake of a place of birth on an FBI background check, a date of birth on an FBI background check, a citizenship on an FBI background check. I had a Russian client, his background check showed that he was a citizen of Singapore. And I've corrected an FBI background check where somebody had a mistaken caption. They were charged and convicted of a crime that had nothing to do with assaulting a minor, and the caption read as if it was a crime involving assaulting a minor, and that very justifiably upset my client. So we corrected that. So you have to know that these things have mistakes on them. And sometimes not just mistakes, but they might not be updated appropriately. What I mean by that is this. If a person has a criminal record, which is not that uncommon, by the way, there's I think 70 million Americans have either a misdemeanor, some sort of misdemeanor arrest or charge or conviction at very least. But a person can be arrested and then go through the system. They could have a charge that was then dismissed, or they could be charged and then convicted, or take a plea deal, or take a plea deal, be convicted, and then get a level of post-conviction relief after that. And then those additional steps after the arrest might not show up on the FBI background check. So in that case, it's very common that a person who, let's say California DUI, It's the most common misdemeanor in the biggest state in the country, right? Person will be arrested for California DUI. They'll get a plea deal, probation, and then they'll expunge that conviction later. Years later, when that person wants to apply for a Spanish residency or a Caribbean citizenship by investment, let's say St. Kitts citizenship by investment, they finally run their FBI background check, and the only thing that shows is the arrest for the FBI back. I'm sorry, for the California DUI. Well, that's a problem, okay? Because A, to the non-initiated reader, it gives the impression that the case might still be open, and then B, it doesn't show that the person eventually got the case expunged. So they have to go through a process to update the FBI background check. I won't go into detail about that now. Maybe that's for a different live or maybe a YouTube presentation. But understand that these things are fallible. And if you're interested in citizenship by descent elsewhere, or any citizenship elsewhere as an American, you should get your FBI background check ASAP just to see what's on it. Just see what's on it. Because if you have to go through a process to make any type of correction or update, that's not a fast process. That's a several months long process. Could even be longer than a year process. It's very easy to get your FBI background check. If you're within the United States, you can go to any one of the qualifying USPS offices, lodge an application online, give your fingerprints in person at the office. And if you have no criminal record, you typically have the background check in your email inbox before you even walk out to your car. If you're outside of the United States and you want to order your FBI background check, your options are more limited. You have to get your fingers messy on an ink pad and send in a paper application. And then typically it takes a few weeks at least, you'll get your FBI background check sent back to you. So that's a big choke point, the FBI background check for people, both for citizenship by descent and for really any type of residency or citizenship elsewhere. People underestimate the need to do anything related to updating or changing their FBI background check. So, okay. Okay. Anybody want to come up here? Open discussion. We won't bite. We're not mean. Anybody want to come up and talk about their experience or ask a question? No?
Yeah, I could toss a couple ideas out here, and I don't think they're going to be groundbreaking, but I think dovetailing on the FBI um, background check, I think that there's just some things you need to do at like regular intervals in life. Much like your birth certificate proves who you are and your identity. Fundamentally, it is the basis that most people actually use to prove that they're a citizen. Like when they go get their passport. I think it's good, like every year or every other year, just to order an updated version of your birth certificate. Um, and similarly with the FBI background check, and it doesn't have to be quite so frequent, maybe every 10 years or something. Just request your ancestors' immigration documents, particularly if there's just a super long, processing time, because they're it, it, people always talk about, oh, hey, I'm going to get a citizenship by descent because it's a plan B, or I want this as an option in the future. Um, and I'm sure that we're all in the similar mindset of like, well, yeah, if you wanted that option, you would have started 4 years ago, or started 10 years ago, or whenever the opportunity presented itself, because it takes a long time to project manage and get it over the final end goal. I think similarly, because that citizenship is a potential option in the future and you want it sooner rather than later, same goes for those documents. Um, and it kind of goes back to that document dependence, idea that we spoke about 2 days ago. And that is, it doesn't hurt to get, it's $30 to get your ancestors' immigration records if you know where they are, but it's going to take 14 months to get it, right? Um, so I think having that foresight, or just like natural proactivity. I really wish there was a, maybe I should do this. I wish there was a subscription service where you could just have it automatically delivered at some regular interval, because um, even in some cases, governments won't necessarily accept a document unless it is, or unless it's semi recent, or even if um, or the issuing body that issued the certificate can change. I'll give you an example. Um, I had a copy of a birth certificate. I didn't have a copy. A client had a copy of their father's birth certificate. They weren't close with their father. They couldn't get him to issue a new one because he was still alive. And birth certificates, you can only get them for yourself until someone's passed away, except in Washington D.C. But other than that, someone has to have passed away for others to get their birth certificate. So this guy couldn't get a new copy of his father's birth certificate, and his father's birth certificate that he did have was about 20 years old, and it was issued by a state authority and not the county or the state. And that issuing body, that city, no longer issues birth certificates today. So when they went to go get the document apostilled, there was some issues because yes, it was technically signed by a city employee and not necessarily a county or state employee. And so I think there's a lot to be said about being proactive on the documentation. Um, and it, and I'll add this little bit, and that is that we speak about how flippant some people are with citizenship by descent and eligibility. I think it similarly goes for just family history and genealogy in general. Everyone has like the story of their family, or you hear through the grapevine, like, oh, your great grandfather did this. And then you dig through the research and you're like, oh, that's kind of sort of true, but it's not 100% true. And you, the person who it most affects, might not have been in the know about your family history. That is 1,000% more true for a government official in a foreign country. They have no idea about you. The documents is the story for them, and there's no other way to get around it. And so to have all of these things in place requires a level of proactivity and also a little bit of intellectual curiosity just to make sure that they are in good shape, um, recently issued and properly presented. And as a little tidbit for some foreshadowing, I'll just drop this hanger, and that is what happens when you get a document and your ancestor completely spelled their name differently or Americanized it in a way that is not going to stand up in front of a judge. Like there's processes for that as well, and it just adds to that singular stacking of project management we kind of spoke about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. You're more ambitious than I am, Patrick. You say get an FBI background check every few years. I'm just trying to get people to get one to start off with, is to see what's on it and make sure that it's in proper shape. Um, a few other common misconceptions about the criminal record and the FBI background check. The terms expungement, expunction, sealing, vacated, these all mean different things in different jurisdictions, right? And what I mean is not always, I don't mean they're necessarily always different, but you have to look past the label to understand what this thing means, this post conviction relief means that you got. In one state, an expungement is something that entitles you to certain rights, and it doesn't, that same word expungement and expunged conviction in a different state will not entitle you to the same set of benefits, rehabilitative benefits that you can get. One of those benefits that matters a lot is what the expungement or expunction or record sealing or relief granted means for updating your FBI background check. Now, it's really important to understand that the FBI CJIS, which issues the FBI Identity History Summary, they don't make a decision directly on whether you're entitled to have an item removed from your FBI background check or to have an update. They defer to the state level repository, the state authority of the state from which the conviction comes. Okay, and it's really really important to know that. So if you get an expunction in Texas or an expungement in California or an expungement in Pennsylvania, Whether and to what extent that entitles you to challenge your FBI background check to have it updated in a way that's favorable to you depends on those respective state laws, right? So it's an individual inquiry for your case, what that type of post conviction relief in that state allows you to get with the FBI CGIS. And I'll try not to go too much in. I guess I'm already going into some detail about this, but I'll have another presentation on this, probably with PowerPoint, so I can kind of write things down and get a little bit more technical here. But this is really important for people to understand. You know, people have unfortunately this idea that if, you know, in my experience, 80% of the people who hear the word expungement or got an expungement, automatically their mind goes to best case scenario. I can get it removed from my record. I can get it removed from my FBI background check, right? Depends on what expungement means in that particular state. But in my experience, in most states, no, it doesn't mean that you can get it removed. It typically means getting, at best, which can still be helpful, a line added under the conviction data on your FBI identity history summary that indicates that the charge was dismissed or expunged, which can be very helpful, but it's not disappearing. It's not making the derogatory information disappear from the FBI background check. So that's that. Patience, you want to say something?
Hey, not really. I've been listening to the Apostille conversation earlier. That was really interesting. I've had a small experience with that because I was trying to run after some docs being apostilled. And one thing that that the birth certificates in the US do well is that at least in Washington State, you can order whenever you order birth certificates, you can.
Can't hear you, Patience.
But
Patience, you cut out there for me. I assume for others as well. Can you repeat that again?
yeah, I was just thinking about the time where I had to order apostilled birth certificates in Washington State, where you can actually pay for them for the birth certificate in like vital records to have them directly apostilled and sent to you, which is super useful for some of the.
Patience, you cut out there again. Yeah, that's right. There are a few states where you can actually request an apostille jointly with the vital record, the birth certificate. I haven't done a formal survey of all 50 states, but I'm pretty sure that's the minority of the states that do that. It's not that way in California, Florida, Ohio, Nevada. Each one of these, you have to go. Pennsylvania, you have to go painfully through the process of both ordering the vital record, getting it, and then sending it back out for apostille. But yeah, you're absolutely right. In those few states, it's great. That's obviously very beneficial. Another question that I've seen or I've had people ask before is, okay, if you get a document apostilled, is that document only good for use in one particular country that's member to the Apostille Convention? And the answer is supposed to be no. A document that's apostilled by one country is supposed to be valid for use in any of the countries that are party to the Apostille Convention, which I believe it's about 120 or 130 countries. But the reason I say the answer is supposed to be that that the document can be used in multiple countries is because there's at least 2 U.S. states that I know of, which very annoyingly actually put on the face of the apostille the name of the country that you've indicated you're going to use the document in. And that's those states that I'm aware of so far are West Virginia. It's either West Virginia or Virginia. I can't remember which one. And Wisconsin. And I'm not sure if that's actually lawful. I think that might actually be a violation of the terms of the ratified Apostille Convention, but I haven't really dug into it yet. So that's kind of annoying that country is mentioned on the face of the apostille. But generally, no, you get a document apostilled, you should be able to use it for, in any of the countries that are party to the Apostille Convention. And by the way, that's one of the reasons that I suggest, for mobility preparedness for Americans. So Americans that want to mobility prep. And what I mean by that is they know they want a citizenship or residency, but they're not sure exactly where or exactly when. I recommend everybody get 3 certified copies of their vital documents. So their birth certificate, marriage certificate if they're married, their children's birth certificates as well. And then I recommend that they take one of those and send one of those 3 certified copies for an apostille. Why? Because so many countries are party to the apostille convention. And so just, if you're not sure where you're going to be applying for a mobility benefit in, by the law of the averages, there's a good chance that it's going to be in a country that's party to the convention. So if you get one of those 3 certified documents apostille ahead of time, well, now you've saved yourself some time and a bottleneck, whenever you are ready to proceed. Okay. Take a look at my notes here, see if there's anything else. I'm pretty much freestyling. I just wrote a couple notes 5 minutes before the spaces started. Basically, things that come to my mind is either common issues, misconceptions, people, things that I think people are benefited by knowing. Okay. I think I've gone over most of the big things. Patrick, you want to hit us with any war stories or add anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, I got a good example of 2 comparative quote unquote citizenship by descent programs. And I think they highlight the point you made earlier, which was that sometimes they're just an acknowledgement that you had the right to claim the citizenship from birth, and another one in which you are essentially conferred citizenship at the point of your application or when they, eventually say yes. Um, and on one end, I will use Italy, which is, it's by right of blood, you're a sanguini. Their foundational law is from 1912. And so there's variations on it over the years, but essentially, when you get Italian citizenship by descent, which is among the most arduous of the programs, um, especially recently, um, you're essentially saying, oh, you were Italian already, and they record your birth at the comune, their version of the county, um, of your ancestor, right? And so in that case, you've always had Italian citizenship. And then there is a citizenship by descent program, essentially, um, through Hungary, called their simplified naturalization program. And it is typically lumped in with with citizenship by descent because it requires you to have some ancestral tie to Hungary in a very forgiving way. But it is considered a naturalization because they don't want to let everyone in, and so they have the requirement of speaking conversational Hungarian. And when you get awarded Hungarian citizenship through this program, you essentially have that conferral date, or your citizenship date is kind of like a naturalization, even though it's based on ancestors. And I can kind of go into the weeds very briefly, but for anyone who knows 20th century history or even a little bit of 19th century history, Hungary had very variable borders, particularly in the Austro-Hungarian time prior to World War One. And so their program says if your ancestor was alive in one of these countries that was ruled by Austro-Hungary at some point in time, and you can prove that they were there, then you can lay claim to Hungarian citizenship, provided you speak as you speak Hungarian as a conversational language. Which, by the way, it's one of Europe's few, if only pure Uralic languages. So it's not something that's like easily picked up. It's not like Spanish or Italian. But um, but your citizenship starts at that time. And so there's like this foundational difference between, whether you can claim to have always had citizenship or versus you gaining citizenship. Um, and that has, obviously ramifications in different aspects. We're talking about global mobility, but But I think the Hungarian program provides a really good example of being a citizenship by descent that is not one in which you were born with the right to claim.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. You hit on another pet peeve of mine, which is people in the space, some people in the space who are flippant about the legal semantics of citizenship by naturalization versus citizenship by birth. And I actually posted, so under this spaces, I actually linked to a tweet that I made before, which is just off the top of my head, 7 potential difference makers in a person's situation based off of whether they obtain a citizenship automatically by acquisition or by naturalization. So, Patrick, simplified Hungarian naturalization is a process that I'm pretty familiar with. I get a lot of consults on it. I don't take clients on it because there's such a lead time. The vast majority of people come without knowing Hungarian. And so I don't take them as clients because they usually have to go on and learn Hungarian for a year or more before they're ready to apply. But Hungary has another process for citizenship by descent, which is Hungarian verification of citizenship. That is, like you said, the claim that you were born as a Hungarian citizen. You are always a citizen. You're just applying to be verified or recognized as such. In the latter case, the citizenship typically has to be passed along in an unbroken chain along the lineage, like a football, from one generation to the next. It has to be passed to the next generation before one generation lost it, if they lost it at all. There's no language requirement for the verification, but for the Hungarian citizenship by verification process, but of course, way fewer people qualify, right? So, people, commonly, somehow, I don't know how it started, but somehow in this space, it became common for people that I guess fancy themselves mobility influencers or consultants to say there's a few ways of getting second citizenship. 1, by investment. 2, by descent. 3, by naturalization. Well, that's category error. That's not true. First of all citizenship by investment is by naturalization. And a big bulk of citizenship by descent is also by naturalization. So that's nonsensical, that type of categorization, right? Naturalization means generally becoming a citizen where you were not a citizen before. So you can naturalize after 5 years of residency in a country, as is the case in the United States or in several other European countries. You can naturalize by descent in some cases, by investment, by exception, variously. So, you know, you know, is it important to know these distinctions? Is it just legal semantics? I think it is very important to know it. I don't think it's just legal semantics. And I'll just go through this tweet. If anybody wants to look at it now, they can look at it or look at it later. Just this list, okay? I wrote just a few of the legal circumstances attendant to the legal semantics of citizenship by naturalization versus citizenship by birth. 1, citizenship by naturalization is more vulnerable to being stripped in many countries. Okay, so why is that the case? Well, because you have to go through a voluntary process and fill out forms typically in order to naturalize. Anytime you fill out a form, you're subject to being accused of making a mistake on the form, okay, or making a lie on the form, or basically, any of the vulnerabilities that are attendant to actually to getting some sort of legal benefit by taking action to assert it. So naturalization is more vulnerable to being stripped in not just many, I would argue most countries. Number 2, citizenship by naturalization is less likely to lead to your descendants obtaining the citizenship in many countries. Why do I say this? Because many citizenships by descent, when they offer a naturalization to descendants, there's a limit to the number of generations that they offer it to. Let's use Slovakia as an example. Slovakia in April 2022 passed a citizenship by descent law that made eligible, with other conditions, but made eligible certain people who are children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of former Czechoslovak citizens or Slovak citizens. Well, if you're naturalizing under that law and you're naturalizing through your great-grandparent and you have an adult child yourself, that adult child is out of luck. You're at the end of the rope of the eligibility for the naturalization. Whereas in general, so I'm generalizing here, we're dealing with heuristics, in many other countries, if you're making the claim for verification of citizenship, you were born a citizen, there's a good chance, and in many cases, that means also that your child was also born a citizen of that country as well, right? So that's number 2. Number 3, Citizenship by naturalization has volition involved in getting it, meaning you have to do something to get it, right? Well, that also matters, right? Because in one case, automatic acquisition of citizenship, you're getting a benefit or a liability, depending on how you want to look at it. John, I'm sure, is thinking about American citizenship by birth, acquisition of citizenship, but you're getting it automatically by operation of law, okay, versus going through steps to naturalize somewhere, right? You have more control over the latter process. You have volition involved. Yes, if you automatically acquired a citizenship at birth, you can stay under the radar by not reporting yourself, consular report of birth abroad, or filing for verification of citizenship. But technically, according to the laws of that country, by operation of law, you became a citizen. So I argue that matters. That difference matters. I'll just go through the last four here real quickly. Number 4, citizenship by naturalization has elements of discretion in many countries, i.e., the authorities can decide they don't want to give it to you because they don't like you or your profile, right? So when you're applying to naturalize, you're requesting the government make you a citizen. There's more discretion typically involved in those processes, right? Whereas if you are making the claim that you acquired citizenship at birth, typically there's much less discretion involved. It's your right to be recognized as such, if of course you fulfill the criteria, you prove what you have to prove, in order to show that you were born with that citizenship. Number 5, hand in hand with number 4, citizenship by naturalization can subject the applicant to disqualification due to previous convictions or immigration violations. Again, when you're naturalizing, a country can and does impose a whole panoply of criteria to disqualify people who have acted in a way they don't like, being convicted of certain crimes, making previous immigration violations. Of course, we have these exclusionary grounds of inadmissibility, grounds of removability in the United States, and other countries have them as well too. But if you were born a citizen, if you were born a citizen and you're applying for verification of that, you're much less vulnerable to being deprived that because the citizenship because of what happened in your past. Because remember, the argument is from day one you're a citizen. You're just applying to get you're formalized, to get recognized. Last 2. So number 6, some countries will allow you to be a dual citizen if you were born into it, but not if you get one of the citizenships by naturalization. That's really important. A lot of countries that are antagonistic to multiple citizenship will have a carve out for their citizens that acquired another citizenship at birth. They were born a citizen, but they won't be as forgiving if one of their citizens goes and naturalizes elsewhere. Again, remember, there's that volition in the naturalization. And typically part of that volition in a naturalization is swearing some sort of allegiance or fealty to another country, right? So some countries that are antagonistic to multiple citizenship, they don't want their citizens swearing loyalty to another country. And then finally, number 7, some countries have exceptions in their tax law for dual citizens by birth, but not by naturalization, e.g. the U.S. renunciation exit tax exemption available to dual citizens by birth in 26 U.S.C. 877 A2AI, right? So there's some statutes in countries that have carve-outs, whether it be for tax or for other reasons, based off of whether a person was born a dual citizen, not if they are born a citizen just of that country and then naturalized elsewhere. So it does matter. You have to know, you should know, not just for yourself, but for your descendants, what's the difference between naturalization? You don't have to become an expert, but what is the difference between naturalizing in a country versus acquiring the citizenship at birth? And which one did you get? Which one applies to you? So that's it. Rant over on that point. Anybody else want to say anything or add anything, agree or disagree before we wrap up?
Assuming you guys can hear me, yes, I totally agree, Parviz. You just made me think of a disposition that exists when someone naturalizes as a Mexican citizen and is not physically present in Mexico for 5 years. There's a constitution article that mentions stripping the citizenship from a naturalized citizen, and that doesn't affect
Patience, you cut out there, but I know exactly what you're talking about. You're absolutely right. That's a vulnerability, irrespective of the degree to which it's enforced. That is a vulnerability for people who naturalize in Mexico versus acquire a Mexican citizenship at birth. Ireland has a similar provision, unfortunately. Paraguay has a similar provision, unfortunately, as well. So do you think it might matter for people that are in that position who naturalize to know whether they are triggering rights and obligations attendant to a naturalized citizen or a natural born citizen? I think it matters. And I think, I guess I try not to be too negative here, but I think people who are in this space claiming to be consultants and advisors who poo-poo the distinction, I think they're just displaying their own ignorance on the topic.
There was even a time in U.S. history where that was the case for those who acquired U.S. citizenship and then left the country for a certain amount of time. There was the expectation that they expatriated, and then if you returned thereafter, you had to prove that you hadn't reacquired foreign citizenship in order to maintain your U.S. citizenship. So it's true across countries, but it's also true across different sectors of time and history.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's been a good hour and 6 minutes of ranting and raving. Anybody want to add any last comments, questions, concerns before we wrap it up? And I think I'm enjoying these. I'm having fun. We got a small audience, but I'm having fun doing it. And John suggested that I save these as MP3s. I'm going to do that as well. I think for the next spaces, I'll probably pick a topic that's a little bit more general, a little bit more open-ended. Hopefully we can kind of get some lively discussion on a topic that affects or interests a lot of people. But anybody want to add anything before we end?
Nope, this was fun. This is the best hour of my day, so I appreciate you hosting this.
My pleasure, Patrick. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for sharing your experiences. Okay, that's it. Thanks, Patience. Thanks, John. Thanks for anybody else who's listening anonymously. Hope you liked it. And feel free to write any suggestions for topics for another spaces, which I'll probably do in a couple of days. Have a great one, everybody. Have a great weekend.